We're telling this story. This time I'm going to tell it with Dr. Michael Welner. He is a forensic psychiatrist who's worked on many of America's most notorious cases. He's interviewed surviving mass killers. Dr. Welner, when I saw this guy's face pop up on the news today, I think my first reaction was, oh, he looks a lot like all the others. And there's the story today for me. They don't necessarily look like the boogeyman anymore. They kind of just look like every guy. And honestly, doctor, I could tell you a million stories of people who have dark music and dark social media, but they're not mass shooters. So what are we to do?
Well, you've thrown out a lot of questions in your introduction, in your earlier segments. So let's tackle them piece by piece. There's no look for a mass shooter that would be different from any other person who chooses to commit murder, but there is a pathway that distinguishes them. And knowing the pathway and understanding them, if you're watching this and you have concerns about someone, small or large, then it would give you at least some reason of whether you should be more concerned. And the most important thing is it starts with someone who doesn't develop resilience and blames others, but at some point along the way, in an early stage, identifies with destructiveness for destructive sake. That's the first stage. It graduates into identifying with destructive icons. And yet, for that smaller subset of people who might be posting content about previous mass shooters that they may admire, there's still a space, there's still a gap from that point to someone who actually will go out and take this on. And the necessary ingredients are someone who is not only alienated, but becomes invested in being alienated. So that person becomes not only isolated, but so much harder to reach. And at some point, because one is alienated enough and someone is removed enough from the mainstream, that person not only hard to reach, but that person becomes failing. That person begins to fail in various aspects of one's life, socially, vocationally, academically. And the most important is sexually. In my experience, none of these individuals have developed healthy interpersonal sexual lives. And I would add, I have never encountered one of these individuals who is a long identified homosexual. I'm not saying that this is necessarily something that relates to heterosexual orientation. But what I am saying is that for those who fail intimately, that they identify their masculinity with destructiveness. And even then, those aren't the people who become mass shooters. The people who do are people who reach a threshold of hopelessness that they come to believe at some key point in their identity that it's never going to get better for them. And they're so identified with the destructive that they embark on a path of saying, hey, this is something that I identify with enough that it's going to be my identity. And I'm going to be someone who becomes larger than life, just like all of these other people that we've turned into celebrities, which is why it is a distinctively American phenomenon. Yes, it occurs in other places, but it is most decidedly an American export. So it's a convergence of a cultural phenomenon with something that's male, because there is no such thing as a female icon of destructiveness. And you know, it's interesting, you started your segment with movies like Ferris Bueller. The movies that are relevant are the indulgently destructive and violent movies that we marinate our developing children with. I wouldn't put my children in front of a violent movie. If they're going to watch what they're going to watch with their friends, it is what it is. But for everybody who preaches to us from Hollywood about guns and everything else, they themselves will pick up guns. They themselves will make money off of the violence industry. And no, the overwhelming majority of people who indulge in all of that entertainment media are not going to become mass shooters, but the mass shooters pick up on the iconography of it and it feeds into it. So there's a cultural contribution, absolutely. That's what happens now. that men weren't just invented, but mass shooting has absolutely been something that's tracked more recent decades. So we have to recognize that this isn't so that while it's something that relates to men, there is a cultural component, there's an American component, and that the solution requires many different aspects of society if we want to get there. I'm telling you this optimistically. We can solve it, but people don't want to take responsibility for what they can do at their end. And by the way, I'm not making excuses for the perpetrators. I'm just saying that there's a reason that folks are copycatting others. He copycatted others. He saw the idealized notion of a destructive individual, and he saw how we treat Uvalde, and he saw how we treat people who kill 20, 30 people. There were 31 people wounded, and in his mind, those 31 people, he intended to kill them all.
Well, I suppose the bright spot, if there's even going to be one, is that he's talking. He's talking to investigators, and hopefully he is just vomiting up all sorts of psychology that will help us to find the next before they can do this. Dr. Welner, it's always good to have you. Thank you so much for your insight tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.